Thank you very much for the warm introduction. I'm Sveinn Valfells. I got to know about Bitcoin in mid-2011. My co-author is Jón Egilsson. I told him about Bitcoin shortly afterwards. We had just finished campaigning against a government legislation in Iceland which would have imposed 40% of GDP of private bank liabilities on the sovereign balance sheet. We managed to stop that from happening together with some other good people. And we thought immediately recognized Bitcoin as being a really, really good idea for an unstable and an inefficient financial world. And we've been, affected by it ever since. So I'm going to dive into the topic of this presentation, which is how to mine Bitcoin profitably. Now, mining is, there you go. This is a short talk, or supposed to be a short talk. So let's get straight to the crux of the matter. Mining is the lowest level of the Bitcoin transaction stack. From a technological point of view, it scales easily because it's parallelizable. So of course there are possibly some second order effects to that, but in principle it's scalable. That computation that's conducted on the blockchain every 10 minutes or so. So, technology is cool, technology is clever, technology is fun, but money ultimately makes the world go round, and economics imposes a constraint on us all. So we decided, Jón and I, to ask the question, if we were a miner, how much capacity could we profitably ask and profitably add to the network, and at what cost? And this question really defines the economic scalability of Bitcoin mining, not the technological scalability. So moving on to the next slide. So we decided to construct what we call a Bitcoin mining profit function, which would capture most of the first order, all of the first order effects of Bitcoin mining revenues and Bitcoin mining costs. So let me walk you briefly through this equation over there, this function. It's a function, profit function. Economists like to use pi to denote profits. So it's pi of x, x being additional capacity that I'm adding to the network, equals revenues minus operating costs minus capital costs. So it's as simple as that. And as we all full well know, if we add capacity x, it will capture a proportion of the Bitcoin network, thereby a proportion of the Bitcoin revenues. The supply is predetermined. We all know how that behaves. But the Bitcoin price is volatile, and so are the transaction fees. Now, if we subtract the operating costs, then in the first simplistic version of this equation, I just use a factor capital C to denote the OPEX costs, and they scale with the amount of capacity that you have. And for the fixed costs, they're amortized over a period T, and they scale. There's variable investment costs and also fixed costs of non-recurring engineering costs, as it were, of installing capacity. Now you can apply this to either to the system or the deployment environment. And what you get if you plot this equation, it looks like the revenues look like this, the investment costs approximately look like this, and the operating costs look like this, and you add the two and you get the total cost, and in between lies your profit. So if you have an intersection between these two curves, you will actually be able to mine profitably, and you will achieve break even once you exceed your fixed costs of investment and get into profitable territory. There will be a point of maximum profitability. There's an upper break-even point once your revenues start flattening off and you intersect the total cost curve again. And ultimately, there's a maximum capacity that you can put and still mine profitably. That's where the revenues start, where the operational cost starts exceeding the revenues. So if we take this little beast of an equation and play around with it, we can actually analytically solve for all these points. So, yes. Up button. Okay. So let's just look at H cap at the top left. We can see that it's really inversely proportional to the operating expenses. The hash rate of maximum profitability, however, is inversely proportional to the square root of the operating expenses plus a factor which is correlated with the variable investment costs. And then you get some pretty large expression for the upper and lower break-even costs. And from the break-even costs, what you can do if you set this equation here, if you set this determinant, as it's called, of this under the square root here equal to 0, and you find the roots of those equations, then you can find what is your shortest payback period for you to recover your mining investment. Now, we ran this on some data, and we essentially estimated kind of the characteristics of what we consider to be 3 generations of ASICs that have been deployed on the network. Generation 1, Generation 2, Generation 3. We break down the constant which determines the OPEX into 4 factors. Colocation costs, which are primarily energy costs. The POW is the power consumption of the ASICs or the system. The power usage efficiency of the data center, and a utilization factor, which tells you which basically measures the uptime characteristic of your system. And I just draw your attention to Generation 3 here, which is probably, there are people in the audience who have actually implemented these on the network, but there you have ASICs which consume approximately 0.1 watt per gigahash. These are FinFET ASICs. It would cost probably about $8 million to tape out. And if you have a really nice setup in a data center, you would probably pay about $50 per kilowatt per month to run them. Now, given these numbers, which are estimates, but educated guesses as to what the market is doing, you can see that the first generation is no longer profitable. This is the growth in the hash rate of the network, and it has exceeded the maximum hash rate of Generation 1. It's close to exceeding the maximum hash rate of Generation 2, but it still has some way to go to put Generation 3 out of business. And these are the implied payback times. So for Generation 1, the payback time is off the charts. Generation 2 is heading off the charts, probably around 10 years right now. And Generation 3 is just at 1 year. So the conclusion here is that Generation 3 is still profitable. But how much capacity could we add? Now, for the purposes of adding capacity to the system, let's take our amortization time as 3 years. That's not unreasonable because maximum processor power efficiency doubles every 3 years. So you could easily argue that you should write off your equipment in about 3 years' time. Then we can plot an actual function like this. Now, these are the profits. And those are the revenues. Those are the total costs, and the capex and the opex. And we see for t equals 3, at a network that's running at 368 petahash, the lower break-even point for our system is 373 petahash. We hit break-even once we add 5 petahash of capacity. The upper break-even point is about 1,300 petahash. Our sweet spot is about 700 petahash. We would be mining at 93% margin currently if we had this system deployed. But the price of getting 5 petahash onto a network is approximately $10 million under these assumptions. So the cost of entry is getting steep. Now, this is how the games will be played over the foreseeable future, I believe, that people will race to find cheap sources of energy, possibly free sources of energy. They will design very efficient ASICs and try to deploy them in very efficient ways. But I think mining is far from equilibrium. Pursuing the existing technology and deployment scenarios, we could get up to about 1,300 petahash easily. But if somebody clever figures out a way, and I think, well, there's at least one company in the space that has announced plans for doing so, of distributing processors in various places and making them on scale so they would be very cheap, and distributing them or embedding them into systems where whoever operates the system could decide to turn the processor on or off at their discretion. We could allow for even more efficient mining than today. So I think embedded mining has potential to disrupt the mining sector as it now is
Sveinn?
Operated. Yes.
Sveinn?
Yes.
I think we're nearly out of time. How are you doing?
Rapid slide. So mining has room for profitable growth. That's the conclusion of the talk. And Bitcoin, I believe, is a compelling innovation that is likely to scale. I'd like to thank Satoshi for sharing his idea with us. And I'd like to thank everybody who contributed to the idea. And I think it really is up to us to see if we can scale with Bitcoin, because I think it will eventually. Thank you very much.
Thank you.